So really today is to talk about some of the specifics of the program, get you thinking about some things you're going to need to do pretty soon, and also take time for questions. I'm sure you've already figured out there's coffee and cookies in the back, if you can get past Peter. You know, if you have a question, just throw up your hands. You have a little agenda here, and we'll mostly go in that order, but probably digress every now and then. So, first thing I want to just emphasize again is try and help you through acronym hell. And that is, what is the relationship between CTRFP and PTD? Clinical and Translational Research Fellowship Program, which is us here today, and Pathways to Discovery. Does anybody think they understand it? If you do, put up your hand. Okay, 2 people, maybe 3. All right, so let me just help you understand this again, because you might get confused in the future. So you are all, by definition, in a Pathways to Discovery. With the exception of one person who's from the School of Pharmacy, you're all from the School of Medicine, which means that your work in this program will qualify you for MD with distinction. You'll have an MD with distinction in one of the 5 pathways. They are clinical and translational research, which is probably going to be most of you, molecular medicine, health and society, health policy and education, and global health. Okay? So, when you come into our program, you pick a pathway. You have to be in one of the 5 pathways. Most of you, but not all of you, will be in CTR, Clinical and Translational Research. Okay? To graduate with your MD in distinction, you have to be in the pathway and fulfill a variety of different requirements. Now, being in the CTRFP is a 1-year program. If you're in CTRFP, you're in the pathway, but not everybody in the pathway is taking the CTRFP. Okay? So you guys are doing the Cadillac version of the pathway, because the other version where people don't take CTRFP, for the most part, we would call that Pathways Light or Core Pathway. You guys are doing the right thing and taking and going for the whole shebang. So for the year that you are with us, you are in the pathway or a pathway, but you are also in the Clinical and Translational Research Fellowship Program, which is a year out where you're getting a stipend, mostly from the federal government, not all of you, but most of you, and you are also doing a whole bunch of other things, the result of which will, in most cases, provide you with all of the legacy requirements that you need to graduate in your pathway. Okay? But for this year, you're in the CTRFP. When you finish the year with us, next July 2014, then you're out of the CTRFP, but you're continuing along in your pathway until you graduate. Okay? Is that reasonably clear? Okay. So, let's talk about how it's going to go. You've all written applications. You've all written excellent applications, so congratulations. You've identified a mentor, you've identified a project, and theoretically on July 1st or thereabouts, you're ready to launch on the conduct of your project. Right? We call that your primary project. We understand that some things change, and from the time that you started writing it, which was probably, when was the day before the deadline?
October 31st? For the LOA, for the letter of intent.
Anyway, you started writing this a bunch of months ago, and probably the science has already moved on since you wrote it. So some things are going to change. Mostly, hopefully, it won't. But our expectation is that you will be working on the project that you said you were going to work on. Again, some things will undoubtedly change, but if there's a big digression from what you said you were going to do, we need to know that, because A, we need to keep track of it, and B, we need to approve it, because we're responsible to the NIH for everything that you do come July 1st. All right. So the primary project is what what you've written, but I want to also make clear that it's a good idea to think about more than one project. Everything else we're going to call secondary projects. So why should you think about secondary projects? One reason is that every research project has moments where things are quiet and moments when things are very intense. You're going to have some downtime, and we obviously want you to get as much out of this year as possible. So one way to do that is to have a project that's a side project that you can be working on. And we have a lot of flexibility around those. So they could be related to the work that you're doing in your primary project with your primary mentor, or it could be something totally different, even with a different group of mentors, as long as it's got pedagogical value and helps you round out your skill set, for whatever it is you're trying to do. The way that we think about this is your primary project is the one that you sort of take total responsibility for. And a very concrete way to think about this is, and this is something that we're going to talk about again and again, and we're going to tell your mentors also, is that the papers that come out of your primary project should, by definition, qualify you for being the first author. Okay? Authorship is a touchy issue, and we'll talk more about that. But the way to think about your responsibilities in the primary project are that you should qualify for being first author. The secondary project, on the other hand, may be something that somebody else started. You don't have as much time to devote to it necessarily. So it might be something that you're pitching in on, learning something, but contributing not necessarily as the primary leader, so that when the time comes to write the paper, perhaps you'll be the first author, but we don't expect that. More often than not, you'll end up being in the middle, potentially, or second or whatever. But the level of participation in your secondary projects are not expected to be at the same level as your primary project. Now, I will say, science is unpredictable. That's part of the fun. But, listening to me today and having this conversation a year from now, you're going to be amazed at how much has happened between today and a year from now. And you don't really know where you're going to end up. Again, that's one of the things that's exciting about this whole journey. It may be, for instance, that your secondary project takes on a life of its own, and you end up spending more time on that. That happens. It's okay, but again, if you're making a major change in your focus, you really need to let us know so that we can, have some input on the science and what you're trying to do. Okay. Anybody have any questions at this point about the projects? Okay. So before we go further into the academic part of this, I want to switch gears a little bit because Katie is here to talk about some more practical things. I want to make sure you get to hear from her before I blather on too long. So you are all getting funded for your work here. The money comes from the NIH, which means that it comes with certain restrictions. One of those restrictions, of course, is that you're working with us full-time. This is a full-time job. It also means that you don't get credit towards your clinical degree. Right? You are not allowed to be in one of these fellowships and earning credit towards your clinical degree, which means that any courses that you take, you can take them, but you will not get credit towards your MDs. Okay? So in addition to the stipend that you're going to get, there are a few other things that are going to come with it, including some ancillary research funds, some of which you can use for a variety of purposes. Katie, are you going to talk about those, or shall I? Okay. Some of which you can use, some of the things you can't use according to federal government rules. So Katie will tell you what you can do, and also what to expect as far as paychecks, and et cetera, et cetera. So Katie, come on up. And
sure. I don't have too much prepared. One of the handouts that you got from Kim is the CTR Fellow Finance Guidelines. And this outlines kind of the general steps that you'll take. Pretty much you'll have your research pot, and you're responsible for keeping track of what you spend. I'm actually going to be handing this my job over to Kiana here. So I brought her, I'll talk about kind of the guidelines, but Kiana is actually listed as the contact. So with your research pot, you pretty much, typically what I've seen is that people spend money out of their pocket and then need to get reimbursed. So are any of you familiar with My Expense? So My Expense is available through My Access. Are you familiar with My Access? So it's on that list of tools. And then there's steps that you need to take on the back here about delegating access to Sandy's Zoo and Kiana Tran, who will help you with any reimbursements. So the process will be you spend money, hold on to your receipt, PDF it, email it to Kiana and Sandy, and their emails are on here again. Sandy will prepare the reimbursement request. Kiana will review it and be in touch with any questions. And then it'll get approved and you should have money back within 5 days. The other funding agencies might have a different process. So, do they know their funding sources?
Probably not. So I'm gonna send you guys all emails that tells you what your funding source is. If you don't already know, you may be familiar with it, but if you don't know, I will let you know. So it's either TL1 or Prof Path or Doris Duke or, what am I forgetting? Dean's Office or OSR. And so depending on how you're funded, it will depend on who you delegate and who you go to for a fund and DPA, which is the little account number that you would spend money using.
So, but I think for all funding agencies, the rules are pretty much the same. You can't buy alcohol, we can't reimburse you for alcohol.
Sorry.
We can't reimburse you for hardware such as computers. Memberships and subscriptions, we can't reimburse you for. Office supplies is a gray area, so if you can write a justification for why these office supplies are absolutely critical to completing your research, then we can sometimes approve it, but rule of thumb is no. And then if you have any other questions, I mean, pretty much if you think, if Joe Schmo walks in off the street and looks at this request, is he gonna approve it? This is your taxpayer dollars, so.
Your
Is it-
parents' taxpayer.
Your
dollars.
yeah. So, you know, if you use points to book a hotel, do you think that's a lot? Can I reimburse you for that?
No. Sorry, I don't know this there.
So, I mean, you didn't spend money, so we can't reimburse you if you didn't spend the money. Or, you know, if you had dinner with friends, if it's not research related, we can't reimburse it.
What about, if I'm doing a survey and I want to give a gift card to someone for participating, can I reimburse?
That can be, it's a good question.
So you guys will notice on number 2 on the list, is get program coordinator approval before you spend money. That's me. So email me before you spend the money and say, this is what I want to do and this is why I want to do it, and write a justification, and then I will approve it or not. And it will depend sometimes on your funding, and sometimes I'll have to check with Amina or Victoria and send it to them. So just talk to me first. It's a good question though. This happened.
So one thing you'll want to keep in mind is that at the end of the year, you guys all take a trip to,
Most of them will take a trip,
Most
yeah,
of
to
them?
the national meeting.
right, so you can,
Atlanta.
Is that where?
so your research pot can be used for that, so just budget accordingly.
How much is this pot?
It
Depends.
on your funding.
Who are you? When I write you the email, it tells you what your funding source is. I will also outline, just confirm the stipend that you're receiving, and I will confirm your research pot. In the past, everybody has gotten the same amount in the research pot. That will be different this year. It will depend on your funding source.
So we've tried very hard to make everybody as equal as possible, just so you know. But over time, as NIH budgets have been cut back, we've had to make some cutbacks too. So some of your details may vary a little bit according to the funding source.
So just check with Kim if you ever have questions. It's just kind of the finance overview.
Can you talk a little bit about disbursement and when that usually?
Stipends.
Yeah.
I can talk about it. So you guys will get a stipend. The first installment will come sometime in July. I can't tell you exactly when. And then the second installment will come sometime in December. Hopefully before the holidays, I'll try and get you guys some money so you can buy presents. So that's how we're doing it this year. It'll come in 2 different installments. Do you guys all have automatic payment sort of set up through? Yes. Okay. And if you don't, then we need to figure out and make sure that your address with the registrar is correct, so that the check, if it's sent to you, doesn't go to your parents or to your permanent address instead of your current address. Okay, that's just one.
So let's go back to the subject of authorship. So we talked about the primary and secondary product. One thing that, again, we're going to emphasize repeatedly is that when you're about to embark on a new research project, it's good policy to sit down with your mentor and talk about expectations in advance, so that there's no tears at the, the end of the process. In other words, you might outline, obviously it's going to change over time, the primary paper that you expect to publish from your research, and sometimes it's very helpful to at least list some of the authors, including your own name on the masthead first, and usually it's your primary mentor who's last. Because in academia, the most important positions on a paper authorship list are first and last. And it's usually the person who's doing all the work who gets first author, and it's the slave master who's getting senior authorship at the end. So you should have those discussions up front, and so that way there won't be any misunderstandings. And this will become clearer as time goes on. We've had situations where students thought that they were going to be first author, the work that they put so much time into, and then when time came to put the names on the manuscript, they got some surprises, and that's when we stepped in and we fixed it, but we'd rather not have to do that. So that brings me to another point, which is that we are, Peter and I and the rest of the leadership here are your advocates. We work for you. So if you're having problems of any kind with your mentors or anybody else, we really depend on you to come and talk with us, because we've dealt with just about everything at this point. We've been running our program for 12 years. This is number 13. And so we really want to help you because we consider you our client, and we will represent you if necessary. More often than not, it's not necessary, but we would really like the opportunity to work with you and figure out if there's any problems up front, what we can do about it. One thing I never, ever, ever want to hear at the end of the year was, despite evaluations that we're seeing that everything is great, that, oh, my mentor was terrible, my project was terrible. Don't want to hear that, because everything is fixable, but we would really like to hear about it sooner rather than later. So, we're here for you. Everything you tell us is confidential within the bounds of the law. So we want you to think about us as being your allies here, okay? So as far as productivity with those papers is concerned, I just want to give you an example of sort of where we're coming from with what we're trying to achieve in this program. So our expectation is that you will end up putting together some abstracts, and we really, really love for you to be publishing some papers from your work here. And almost everybody does, okay? Almost everybody, 90% plus, produce at least one paper, usually several. But I want to be clear about a couple of things. One is everybody's pace is different. You cannot compare one person's research project to another. So if you see that so-and-so is getting up during their work in progress and saying, well, we just got our second paper accepted, and you haven't even started writing the manuscript for your first one, that's not a reason for panic. The important thing is that you finish, ideally by the end of the year, but you do have more time next year, after this year is up, to wrap up some of the things you are going to be doing as part of your legacy products for your pathway requirements, okay? So not to panic. We want you to work as hard as possible, obviously, and get as many papers out as possible. That will be to your interest, in your interest, it'll be in our interest, everybody's happy, okay? But I also want to be clear that I would rather you publish one piddly little paper in some obscure journal and be happy with your year and want to do more, and go and get that K grant or that R21 grant or whatever, then publish 5 papers in Nature and get so burnt out that you never want to do this again. Okay? Our goal is not to produce a big bibliography from our graduates. Our goal is to produce a long list of people who say they want to continue doing clinical and translational research. So when you leave here, you're not going to be independent researchers. Nobody expects that. This is the first step of a journey where hopefully your appetite will be so whetted that you know that when you finish your residency, you're going to want to do a fellowship that's interested in getting somebody who wants to do research, and you're going to start writing those K grants and preparing yourself for a position either as an academic or contributing scholarly work in some way or another. Okay? That's our goal. When we report to the NIH on what we did with your parents' tax dollars, we're going to tell them this person and this person and this person applied for and got a K grant. They're going to want to see the publication list, but that's really secondary. Okay? So our goal is to get you excited. We think that you actually came into medical school excited about research. Hopefully it hasn't been entirely drummed out of you, but if it has been, which we doubt because you wouldn't be here, we really want to get you excited all over again. Now you have some clinical perspective. I think you're looking at the world a little differently from when you entered med school. So what we really want to do is, get our clutches into you and never let go again. Okay. So, a few things that are going to be important for you to try and get your projects off the ground as efficiently as possible. So one is to begin to work, if you haven't already, on your CHR applications. Not everybody needs one, but most people do. And if you do, I can tell you that one of the biggest sources of frustration for people in terms of getting stuff up and running is delays in CHR approval. I would strongly encourage you that if you have not begun that already, to contact your mentor and start working on the CHR application, like now, because it will take potentially a few months. So, any questions about that? Okay. There are a few other things that you need to do from an administrative standpoint. One, it relates to getting certified for HIPAA. There are some modules that Kim gave you the links to for your HIPAA approval. It's number 10. There's 3 modules with a link that you have to do by August 1st. So this gives you training to make sure that you're not breaking the law as far as releasing confidential, protected health information. As far as that's concerned, yeah?
Our research is in basic science. We do that, I still do that.
I don't know if you do, but I'd recommend you do it anyway because it's fun. And I think it's good to understand because you're going to need it as a clinician. Thank you. When you go back to the wards, you have to apply the same rules. So I think it's probably worth doing. So you need to do that. And the other thing I just want to say is, how many of you are familiar with the rules about HIPAA and inadvertent release of information? Any of you? So the laws have changed over the last few years. They've gotten much, much stricter. And I need to tell you, it sort of scares the crap out of me, that if you, let's say, have some information on the laptop, how many of you have laptops? I'd say how many of you have fingers? If you have, say, some information on your laptop which is protected health information, and let's say somebody steals it, you could be liable, and I'm not kidding, for several $100,000 fine and jail. It's not a great start to a medical career. So I can't emphasize enough how paranoid you need to be about protected health information, making sure that if you have any on your laptop, which hopefully you'll minimize, that your laptop is encrypted. Everybody's laptop must be encrypted. In fact, the most secure way there is of dealing with protected health information is to use My Research. Did any of you ever use that? So it's one of the My's. This is, so My Research is available to everybody who works here at UCSF, and it allows you to store information on the UCSF servers behind a whole bunch of files. So it's pretty safe, and you can not worry about the integrity of your information. So think about that when you're starting to put some data together. Okay. Any questions about that? Yeah.
If we do like a HIPAA thing through our human relationships, do we have to give you those forms or? Okay.
Yeah, they'll need proof that you are HIPAA certified.
Okay.
So if you have them, send them to me and we can talk about it.
And is this different, the HIPAA certification that we did at the beginning of our first year of medical school?
Probably not, but it is possible that it's been updated. So I think to be safe, we should ask everybody to do the same thing. So there are 3 modules you need to take, and then you need to sign something, and you need to review something else. So the detail is all on this agenda and in your program guidelines.
So speaking of the guidelines,
But that's segue.
so when you came to the last meeting, you got a copy of these. Remember that? Hopefully you read them completely, cover to cover. At the back, there is a signature form that I think most of you probably already signed. But if you have not signed it, indicating that you read it and agreed to abide by the items in here, we need to have you do so.
So it's behind your contact information form. If you could sign it tonight and give it to me, that would be great.
I really strongly recommend that you read this because there are things in here that affect you throughout the year. One of the things we don't like to hear at the end of the year when some requirement comes up is, I didn't know I had to do that, because it's all here. Okay, so please read it carefully and then sign it and give us that. Okay, so you have a few other things that we require of you in the CTRFP. Not very many things. We try and give you a lot of liberty this year. The way I think about it this year is it's your sabbatical from medical school to take a breather, think about what you've already learned, think about the questions that are coming into your heads at this point, and just take a moment to be reflective. To be reflective. And I think you will realize at the end of the year how valuable that was. But there's a few things that we do ask you to do. They are mandatory for the program. So one of them is to attend the works in progress, which we call the WIPs. These are generally twice a month. And the idea is that we combine research presentations from you all with a faculty presentation. So we've divided you into 2 groups, and for the first half of the year, you will be with the same group. One group of you is going to come from 11 to 12. Then we're going to have our 12 to 1 faculty presentation, and then the second group will be from 1 to 2. First group of 12 to 11 to 12 for the first group, 12 to 1 for the faculty presentation, 1 to 2 for the second group, right?
It's 11 to 1 and 12 to 2. Group A needs to be there from.
Right, so everybody's there for the faculty presentation. And we do give lunch, so there are some free lunches. And then, so it's going to change mid-year. And what we're going to do in mid-year is we're going to switch the groups around so that you get to hear other people's presentations that you didn't hear in the first half of the year. And the other thing that we're probably going to do is switch the time. I'll tell you why. So every year at the end of the year, we meet with the outgoing students and get their suggestions for how to make our program better. And one of the suggestions that your predecessors came up with for this coming year was to take those WIPs and remove them from the middle of the day where they are now and put them either at the beginning or the end of the day. And so what we're probably going to do is put them to the beginning of the day in the second part of the year and serve breakfast instead of lunch. So we'll probably have them from 8 to 11.